all kinds of things. So I went to the park department and said, hey, if we take down your chain link fence and replace it with the wrought iron, I'm willing to put it on our side of the property line, so we're responsible for the expense of maintaining it indefinitely. In return, I'd like to, have some things that our community could benefit from, which would be putting in a gate with secure key code access so that our population can use that park. At that time, there was no access from our side of the park property, so we weren't restricting any existing access. We were actually adding access, but making it an amenity for our tenants, and at the same time doing something for the city. And so that, again, is an example of a public-private partnership with the first big apartments that I developed in Wichita. After Chisholm Lake Apartments, I had been doing some research and analysis and realizing the high demand for better and more housing in rural communities. I realized that this has been a long-term trend of rural communities not attracting the type and quality and quantity of housing that they needed, especially in rental properties. And the reason is you've got a couple things going against you. Number one, you typically have lower rent rates than a city like Wichita by 10, 20, 30%, and it's 10, 20% more expensive to build here because, especially in communities smaller than McPherson, because to do a 100 or 200 unit apartment complex, you're probably going to have to bring in labor from outside the city to do that big of a project in a lot of rural communities. So no one builds apartments, not quality market rate apartments. A lot of low income housing, subsidized apartments get built, but no one does the kind of quality housing that a big company moving into your community, looking to establish a manufacturing facility and wanting to bring in managers and staffing. Nobody builds the quality of apartments to provide the transitional living that attracts those types of businesses and also attracts people who grow up, graduate, go away to college, and want to move back, or teachers that come here to teach. It's a real challenge for communities because that quality housing doesn't get built. So I went to work trying to see if I could figure out how to create a prototype for rural apartments, and it was really, really hard. Me and my staff spent almost a year and a couple $100,000 just doing a lot of research, going through a lot of models, doing redesign after redesign, trying to figure out how to value engineer, as they say in the construction world, where you take fixtures and all kinds of things and try to swap them out with something that looks as nice and is almost as nice but costs a little less. Did a lot of things like that. Was able to create a model that kind of got close but didn't quite get us to the finish line. Then we had to go into the property management business because property management is expensive, and so we had to figure out the expertise of creating a model that could bring down the operating costs on the back end. So to make a long story short, we created a really great model that will provide rural housing, market rate, unsubsidized. When we come into a community, we don't ask for a single thing. We don't ask for the city to give us any funding. We don't ask for any funding from the state. We don't ask for any funding from anybody. And we can create nice quality apartments that are at market rate to help support things like jobs. So when we created that model, a friend of mine, Matt Jordan, who's at the Kansas Leadership Center in Wichita, said, you ought to talk to the U.S. Department of Agriculture about this. The USDA has a big stake in communities all across Kansas, these rural communities, and they may be interested in what you come up with. I said, well, they may be, but I don't know. I'm kind of skeptical whether they'll care. He said, let's get a conference call. So he got a conference call set up with me and Patty Clark, the director of the U.S. Department of Agriculture for Kansas. And about 10 minutes into that call, she says, can I come to Wichita and have a meeting and bring some people and take a look at this model? Because this sounds really exciting. And I said, sure, let's do it. She said, well, I'm going to be going to Washington for a month, but I'll be back in December. So let me call a few people and reach out to them and say, hey, are you available in December to come to Wichita and see this model that Jason's got? And I said, fine. And didn't think a whole lot about it, but reached out to a couple people I knew and told them about the meeting. And over the course of a month, it went from a meeting of probably 10 or 15 people to the first annual Rural Housing Conference that was hosted in Wichita with almost 150 representatives from across the state of Kansas that came to not only see our model, but to hear presentations by the U.S. Department of Agriculture, to hear some presentations by other housing groups. And so the Kansas Rural Housing Conference was born. From that event, which what I heard most of was people saying, our community, we know this need is here for better housing, more housing, but we just don't understand our circumstances. We get told to go buy a housing study, and we go out and find firms, and those firms want $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 for a study when we talk to other communities that have done it, that study sits on the shelf and doesn't seem to do much. So what do we do? And so I started thinking, I've got this philosophy where I'm trying to help people and trying to build relationships based upon seeing not only what communities want and need, but what I can really do for other communities. So the Kansas Housing Research Conference, which I helped create and now lead, created a Kansas Housing Research Project, which was launched in January of this year. In the state of Kansas, there's 627 cities, and some of you have seen some of this information already. There's 105 counties, and I decided for some reason that I wanted to do a report for every single one of them. It seemed like a really good idea at the time before I actually had to start writing the reports, because that means there's 732 reports. And when I built the first report based upon what I thought would be valuable information for communities, it ended up being an 84-page report. So by the time I got done creating all these reports, I've created 61,488 pages of information, data, and analysis on Kansas housing. But the great news is it's free. It's free to every city and every county across the state of Kansas, so they don't have to go spend $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 to get basic information. And anybody can go to kansasruralhousing.com and download at that website any of the reports for any city or any county across the state of Kansas. And so I really felt that that created a great value and helped meet a need that for insight and understanding that communities have been lacking to that point. And so that really helped kickstart the Kansas Rural Housing Conference's 2014 initiative. So what I want to do for you today is to show you what the McPherson housing study showed, what we found in that data report, so that you get a little bit better idea of the circumstances in your community when it comes to housing. Because again, if the governor is going to make this an important issue and going to suggest legislation, and your representatives at the state level are going to be talking about voting on issues, I think it's important that you as a community understand where you're at, what your needs are, and have a voice for saying this is what we need. And so this is called the 2013 McPherson Housing Data Report because it reviews all the data from 2013. So 2014 reports will come out later this year when the census releases their data, because these reports are taking all of the census data that's related to housing for McPherson, compiling that, putting it in a reference guide format so you can see the primary data that's provided by the Census Bureau, and then analyzing that data and providing that analysis to help create insight. So when we look at McPherson, first of all, we'll look at population. There's been a declining in population since 2000, which is not unusual. It's pretty typical. We actually see since 2010 a kind of a turn back, an upturn back in a positive direction. If we look at the housing data, so these pie charts here show in blue the percentage of housing that are owner-occupied, and the red is the percentages that's renter-occupied housing. So for the U.S. and Kansas, really what you look at is a distribution of about 2/3 owner-occupied housing and 1/3 rental housing. When we look at McPherson, we've got about 74% owner-occupied and 26% rental, which may be an indicator that you're undersupplied when it comes to rental housing, but you can't draw any conclusions just from one data point. So we'll keep that in mind, but we'll look at some other things. Can everybody hear okay? This mic seems to be working pretty good, but just wanted to check. So next thing is occupied housing units. So when you look at every single type of dwelling unit in a community, whether it's houses, whether it's mobile homes, whether it's rental properties, what is the occupied number of housing units? Well, it looks like things are pretty strong here in McPherson, because the red line is the local number, the yellow line is the state average or median, and the blue line is the national number. So you can see that occupancy rates here in the McPherson community are not only above the national average, but they're above the state average as well. But it looks like it's converging towards that state average here most recently. We also look at homeowner vacancy rates. So this is really the vacancy rates just in owner-occupied homes. And you see here that this is pretty low. I don't know if you can see those numbers okay, but this is 3% and this is 0%. So in around 2009, it was down around 0.5%. It's gone up a little bit, but it's still below the national and state averages. And just so you know, the reason we don't have anything before 2009 is that The census has been doing its analysis every 10 years for a long, long time. But the Census Bureau has only been really drilling down on an annual basis and trying to provide numbers for every community since 2009, when it started an American Community Survey project. And so, just so you know why the local numbers don't go quite as far back as the other ones, that's the reason. When we look at the median home value, again, the red line is your local data, the yellow line is state, and the blue is national average. This is a really common distribution. In fact, usually what we see is that red line, which is the local versus rural community, is about equidistant from the yellow line as the yellow is from the blue. So this one has the red line really pushing up against the state average, which means that your community has pretty strong median home value. And one of the points I want to make here is you look at the national line and how it's gone down since 2006. The reason for that is the housing bubble and the things you heard a lot of press about around 2006, 2007. What happened on the national average is big cities that are involved, obviously, in that national average had over-speculation of people investing and driving up prices of homes. And then when that speculation went too far, it corrected. And that's all that happened. There wasn't a bubble. Your homes weren't overvalued. There were just speculative investors and developers that were overvaluing certain homes in certain markets. So when it corrected, the United States as an average did have to go through a pretty prolonged correction. It's just now starting to straighten itself out. But Kansas, where you didn't see that speculative investment, you didn't ever see a downturn. Here you saw there was steady increase in values all the way up to 2007. And in 2007, when the national average began its downturn, the Kansas number actually just stayed exactly the same. Didn't go down, didn't go up, and the next year it resumed a positive trend going back upward. And you also see that in your local numbers. So all good news for the home values for the market around here. Rentals as a percentage of housing supply. This is the timeline view of those pie charts at the beginning. So the pie charts at the beginning are a snapshot of the most recent data. This takes it back to 2009 and looks at, it looks like, there was a higher percentage of rental properties that's gone down now. And we'll talk here in a minute about the reliability of this data, but if this is right, then it would seem like the percentage of the rentals, the housing class has been falling, which would indicate either a growth in houses and not a growth in rental properties, or some things coming offline due to age and condition. So we can't really draw a conclusion